What's going on, you guys? My name's Ty Knots, and welcome to Top 5 Unknowns. 5 mysterious, unexplained rituals you need to hear. Number 5. The Eleusinian Mysteries are a documented set of beliefs and traditions that took place about 2,000 years ago, eventually ending around the year 500. According to their beliefs, winter was caused by a god who was the leader of a cult, who was kidnapped by Hades and forced to spend several months with him in the underworld. This was their explanation for winter, just to give you an idea of the time period we're talking about here. Admittance into this supposed kidnapping cult would only be granted if you'd learned to speak fluent Greek and had never committed a violent act. It was quite a simple task, and many people were involved in the cult because of this. If you met these requirements, an initiation ceremony would take place admitting you into the cult, though we don't know a whole lot about this ceremony as much of that information has been lost over time. What we do know is that the initiation would take place on what we now know as the 15th of September, with it taking place in Athens. The day after everyone had met, they would head down to a nearby ocean and wash themselves, then rest for 3 days. They would then head out on a journey that would typically take about 25 miles, during which time they would sing and praise the gods relentlessly. The next day would begin a sacrifice of several bulls, who would then be carried to altars by members of the group. They would then act out a series of myths revolving around their god, with there being some indication that they may have partaken in a psychedelic beverage, though this information hasn't been confirmed. It was said that the initiates would drink a cocktail made from barley and pennyroyal. The barley would have been known to have been infested with ergot, a type of fungus, and the effects would largely be similar to the psychedelics that we have to this day. During this psychedelic journey, the initiates would believe that they'd contacted the gods, and at the end of it all, would be granted access into the cult, with many believing that this initiation would grant them eternal immortality after their physical bodies had been left behind. Number 4. Back in the 1840s, a man known as Major McPherson spent his life living among and studying a group of people known as the Khans of Orissa, located in India. He stayed here for several decades, documenting their belief system and their strange way of living. One very odd example of this was the fact that several little girls from the area were known to have come up missing. The Major later learned that they'd been taken away by villagers and presumably passed away, because the villagers were afraid of them growing up and becoming troublemakers, making them easy targets for alleged hunters. The Major also recorded a ritual that the locals believed would grant them immortality. In fact, later on in his career, he lobbied to have this ritual ended due to the dangers surrounding it. The Khand people believed in a series of gods and goddesses, each of which was responsible for a specific task, such as hunting, livestock, or agriculture. These gods were worshipped by means of sacrifices and oftentimes involved humans. The sacrifices would oftentimes be made because locals believed in twisted ideas, such as that they would make their fruits grow larger or help a major tragedy avoid the village, or as mentioned a moment ago, that they could lead to immortality. The individuals they would use for this procedure were oftentimes taken away from a nearby culture, or purchased on the black market. They were also sacrificial families whose sole purpose was to birth children for a sacrifice. As violent as it sounds, the locals believed that after the sacrifice was completed, the victim would become a god, so it certainly makes you question whether or not they truly believed that they were doing the right thing with all of this. The rituals would typically last 3 to 5 days, involving parties, celebrations, baths, special clothing, and even a parade. At the end of the parade, oftentimes the sacrifice would be covered in flowers and special oils and literally worshipped by the community. He would then be fastened to a post and the sacrifice would begin. Number 3. The Aztecs are a culture widely remembered for their strange beliefs, but what most people don't realize is that the majority of their rituals weren't even well documented, and because of this, they've been lost to time. The rituals that we know of today are only a small portion of the rituals that actually took place. A single Dominican priest is known to have documented most of the events that we know of, and while he didn't attend these rituals himself, he interviewed others who had. The Aztecs are known to have practiced these rituals very regularly. One ritual in particular involved a man who would be dressed up as a god and then sacrificed to the gods. This man was oftentimes chosen from a large group of warriors who had been captured from a nearby village, usually strictly being chosen because of their beauty. Simple things such as skin blemishes would immediately disqualify someone from participating. These individuals would be prepped for their sacrifice for over a year, being imprisoned the entire time while awaiting their fate. After a year had passed, the man would be dressed in a costume and given a new name. He would then live in a temple for several months, being worshipped by upper-class citizens. He would then be led on parades throughout the day and be locked up in a cage at night so that he couldn't escape. In the days before the sacrifice, he would be given 4 women to do literally anything he wanted to with them. His hair would then be cut off and he would be held down by a group of priests while his heart was taken out. He would then be put on display nearby all the other sacrifices who'd come before him. Number 2. James Frazer was a Scottish anthropologist who's known to have been heavily involved in studying magic and certain religions, before eventually changing his gaze to science. In his work, he makes mention of a type of mass that took place during one of the most desperate times in France's history. Only a handful of priests today even know that the ritual existed, and many of them refuse to even speak of it. Only the Pope himself is said to be able to undo and forgive the atrocities that took place during this mass, with no one being permitted to carry out the ritual again. The mass would take place in an old or abandoned church, continuing on until exactly 11 p.m. Once 11 p.m. hit, the mass would be said again, yet backwards this time, up until midnight. A communion would then take place, with the black substance being substituted for wine. They would then drink from a well in which a baby would have been laid to rest, with the priest writing out a cross on the ground with his left foot to end the ritual. According to participants and records, the mass was carried out to target one individual who would then become sicker and sicker after the event had taken place. It was essentially a curse, not a mass. It would often be carried out in secret, with no one knowing just why this person was becoming so sick. Number 1. It was believed by the Maori people that a ceremony needed to be performed to bless a home after it was built, before a family moved into it. Due to the destructive process of building the home, such as killing trees and whatnot, it was believed that the home carried dark energy up until it had been properly blessed. In fact, during the creation of these homes, builders refused to even do simple things such as blow sawdust out of the way. They believed that their breath could taint the tree's purity, so they opted to brush it away instead. Once the home's construction was completed, a prayer would be said inside of the home, abolishing the curses of the wood that had been used to build it. Another chant would be said to forgive the use of tools that had been used, and the last prayer would be said to keep the home and occupants safe from harm. A woman was then always requested to be the first to enter the home, with her cooking a large meal after the ceremony, with water being left on to boil to ensure that the inside of the home was safe, though I honestly can't find an explanation for why they would have done this. The rituals were carried out as recently as 1908, with an eyewitness documenting them and spreading the word. What's quite disturbing though, is that many years ago, these same rituals were still carried out, but with a sacrifice, oftentimes a human one. These victims, oftentimes similar to the cultures we mentioned in this video, would come from neighboring villages or from families whose sole intent was to birth sacrifices. Today, it's believed that these rituals still continue on in certain parts of the world. However, thankfully not with their sacrificial nature. At least, not as far as we know. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep updated with our videos.